Imagine for a moment that you awaken one morning and realize that everything you've ever pursued, success, love, pleasure, peace, has been nothing more than a mirage shimmering in the distance. You've spent your life walking toward it, yet the closer you come, the further it retreats. You've sought happiness as though it were a hidden treasure, buried somewhere outside yourself, waiting to be discovered by luck, effort, or divine mercy. But what if the great tragedy is not that you have failed to find happiness? What if it's that you've been looking in the wrong direction all along? Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." He was not speaking of comfort or bliss. He was speaking of depth, of the inner fire that burns not for happiness but from it. You see, happiness is not a prize at the end of the path. It is the strength with which you walk the path itself. To seek happiness as a possession is to chase a shadow. To become it is to stand in your own light. The modern soul, weary and fragmented, often searches for quick meaning, through distraction, validation, or external achievement. But Nietzsche saw something different. He saw the human spirit as a crucible, meant to endure, to transform, to create meaning out of chaos. He invited us not to find joy, but to forge it. For true happiness does not come to those who escape suffering. It comes to those who have met suffering, looked it in the eyes and said, "You will not destroy me. You will make me whole." Carl Jung would remind us that happiness is not found in the absence of the shadow, but in its integration. When you stop fleeing from pain, from fear, from the unknown depths of your psyche, you stop living as a divided being. The light of consciousness grows brighter only when it illuminates the darkness within. The greatest joy is not the laughter that denies sorrow, but the serenity that understands it. So stop seeking happiness. Stop begging life to make you feel good. Instead, descend into yourself, into the places where your wounds whisper, where your fears tremble. There you will find the raw material of transformation. There the fragments of who you are will begin to align into something greater, something radiant. Nietzsche did not want us to become happy people. He wanted us to become whole people, creators of value, sculptors of meaning, lovers of fate. To say yes to life, even when it burns, is to transcend the need for happiness and to embody it instead. When you stop chasing the light and realize that you are the source of it, the world itself begins to glow differently. Happiness will no longer be something you seek. It will be something you emanate. It will not be a fleeting emotion, but a state of being, a quiet power, born from your willingness to be real, to be vulnerable, to be alive. And in that moment, you will understand what Nietzsche tried to tell us all along, that to become who you truly are is not the path to happiness. It is happiness itself. We have been conditioned, almost since birth, to believe that happiness lies somewhere beyond ourselves, hidden in the next achievement, the next love, the next possession, the next escape from discomfort. This belief, though comforting, is one of the most subtle forms of self-deception the modern psyche has ever endured. For when you make happiness your object of pursuit, you immediately cast yourself into a state of lack. You declare unconsciously that you are not yet enough. And from that moment onward, every effort you make to be happy deepens the very void you are trying to escape. Nietzsche understood this paradox profoundly. He observed that when man sets happiness as his highest goal, he weakens himself. The pursuit of comfort, pleasure, and constant satisfaction dulls the instincts that make life truly vital. Happiness, in Nietzsche's view, was not an achievement, but a symptom, the natural expression of a life lived with purpose, courage, and authenticity. Similarly, Jung would have argued that what we call happiness is not the goal of the psyche, but the side effect of psychic wholeness, the harmony of the conscious and unconscious self. You see, happiness, as most people imagine it, is an illusion of control. We want to curate life so that it pleases us, to sculpt the world in a way that spares us from pain. But the psyche does not grow in the light of pleasure. It grows in the soil of challenge, tension, and contradiction. When you are constantly seeking to feel good, you are unconsciously rejecting half of what makes you human. And by rejecting it, you imprison yourself within a shallow version of existence. What happens then when you stop seeking happiness and begin to become it? You begin to experience life not as a consumer of sensations, but as a participant in being. Happiness ceases to be an object you chase and becomes a field of awareness in which you move. You start to understand that what you call happiness is not dependent on external conditions, but on your capacity to be fully present, to be alive in the immediacy of your experience. Whether it is joyful or painful, sacred or profane, there is a profound psychological and even sexual dimension to this shift. When you seek happiness, you are like the lover who chases pleasure but never truly surrenders to intimacy. The more you try to possess the moment, the more it slips away. But when you become happiness, when you inhabit your body, your breath, your emotions, you cease grasping. You no longer desire to own the experience. You are the experience. In that surrender, a deeper ecstasy emerges, not the fleeting kind that comes from stimulation, but the quiet, enduring pleasure of being fully conscious, fully alive, fully yourself. Nietzsche would have called this the affirmation of life, the willingness to say yes to existence, not because it guarantees comfort, but because it is yours. Jung might call it individuation, the process by which the self integrates its many layers and becomes whole. The two men, though different in language, converge on the same truth. Happiness is not what happens when life pleases you. It is what unfolds when you align with the totality of your being. And yet this alignment demands courage. To stop seeking happiness means to confront the emptiness within, the restless craving that constantly whispers, "Something is missing." That voice is not your enemy. It is your invitation. It asks you to descend into the core of your being and ask, what is it that I truly want? Most will discover that what they long for is not pleasure, but meaning, not excitement, but connection, not constant joy, but wholeness. When you cease to hunt for happiness, you free yourself from the tyranny of comparison, from the exhausting need to prove that your life measures up to some idealized vision. You begin to live more honestly, more directly. You allow yourself to feel, not just the pleasant, but the raw, the uncertain, the unpolished. And in doing so, you encounter a deeper form of happiness, one that does not glitter but glows. So the next time you find yourself searching for happiness, pause. Ask not, how can I be happy, but how can I be real? Because when you are real, unapologetically, vulnerably, courageously real, happiness ceases to be something you chase. It becomes the natural radiance of your being, shining effortlessly through the cracks of your humanity. We often speak of happiness as though it were born in gentle sunlight, as though joy could exist apart from suffering. Yet life, in its deepest truth, is a tension between opposites. Light and shadow, pleasure and pain, creation and destruction. To live only for one side of this polarity is to deny the essence of existence itself. Nietzsche understood this. He knew that suffering is not the enemy of joy. It is its foundation. Without the fire, there can be no gold. Without the wound, there can be no transformation. When Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," he was not glorifying pain. He was illuminating its purpose. Suffering is the crucible in which the self is forged. It strips away illusion, comfort, and false certainty until only the essential remains. And in that nakedness we meet ourselves. Not the self we show the world, but the self that trembles beneath our masks. Jung would have said that this encounter with suffering is a confrontation with the unconscious, a descent into the depths where all that is repressed waits to be redeemed. We live in a time that worships comfort. The modern psyche flees from pain as though it were poison, medicating every discomfort with distraction, entertainment, or ideology. But what happens to a soul that never suffers consciously? It becomes fragile, unrooted, unable to endure the weight of existence. It lives on the surface, forever hungry, forever afraid. Suffering paradoxically grounds us. It brings gravity to the spirit. It compels us to ask questions that comfort never could. And there is something profoundly erotic, even sacred, in this confrontation. To suffer consciously is to open oneself completely, to feel, to break, to surrender to the raw intensity of life. Pain, when met without resistance, has the same transformative potential as sexual union. In both, the boundaries of the ego dissolve. Something greater moves through us. The death of our old identity, our old certainties, becomes the condition for renewal. That is why the mystics, the artists, the lovers, and the philosophers all meet in the same place, the threshold between agony and ecstasy. Both arise from the same source, the capacity to feel deeply. Nietzsche called this the yes-saying spirit, the ability to affirm life in its totality, not just in its pleasant parts. He saw that the highest form of strength is not domination over life's hardships, but intimate participation in them. To embrace suffering is to recognize it as the creative pulse of existence itself. Every birth, literal or symbolic, requires a tearing apart. Every transformation begins with dissolution. We must die again and again to the versions of ourselves that can no longer contain the soul's expanding truth. Jung's language for this was individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole by integrating all aspects of the self, including the painful, the broken, the rejected. Suffering serves this process as a guide. It points to what has been ignored or denied. Every anxiety, every heartbreak, every humiliation holds within it a message from the unconscious. Come closer. There is something here you must understand. And if you listen, if you dare to enter that dark place, you begin to see that suffering is not punishment, but communication. It is life itself trying to evolve through you. When we resist suffering, we stagnate. When we accept it, we awaken. The task then is not to escape pain, but to participate in it consciously, to allow it to strip us of everything false and superficial until we stand face to face with what is real. This is why both Nietzsche and Jung viewed suffering as sacred. It is the path through which the human spirit matures, the alchemy that transforms raw emotion into insight, weakness into compassion, chaos into meaning. Think of how a muscle grows only when it is torn, or how love deepens only after it has been tested by loss. Suffering is not an obstacle to joy. It is its secret doorway. The more deeply we are willing to suffer consciously, the more fully we can experience the beauty of being alive. It is not a curse. It is the price of consciousness itself. So the next time life breaks you open, do not rush to close the wound. Sit with it. Feel the burning, the trembling, the longing that rises within. In that vulnerability, you are closest to truth. In that rawness, you are being remade. Let the pain teach you, shape you, soften you. Because what Nietzsche and Jung both understood is that only through the fire of suffering can the soul become radiant. There is a part of you that you do not wish to meet. You sense it in moments of jealousy, anger, lust, or quiet resentment. Those flashes of emotion you quickly suppress because they threaten the image you hold of yourself. You call it your dark side, your weakness, your flaw. But Carl Jung called it something more honest, more necessary, the shadow. And until you learn to face it, you will remain divided within yourself, forever seeking light while unconsciously fleeing from it. We like to believe that happiness is born from purity, that to be good, to be enlightened, is to be free from darkness. Yet this is one of the most destructive illusions of modern life. The repression of darkness does not make us moral. It makes us brittle. What is denied in consciousness does not disappear. It sinks. It becomes an undercurrent, shaping your desires, your fears, your relationships, and even your sense of purpose. The more you deny your shadow, the more it governs you. Nietzsche saw this long before psychology gave it a name. His vision of the Übermensch, the self-overcoming human, was not a call to perfection, but to integration. To rise beyond the common self is not to eliminate the dark impulses of the soul, but to give them form, direction, and meaning. He understood that to truly live is to accept the totality of one's being, the noble and the shameful, the sacred and the sensual. Jung echoed this in his lifelong work, teaching that one cannot become whole without reconciling these opposites within. The shadow is not merely moral darkness, it is psychological fertility. It contains all that has been exiled from consciousness, our repressed creativity, our forbidden desires, our unclaimed power. It is where vitality hides. When you reject your shadow, you reject your own life force. And that rejection, that self-division becomes the true source of your suffering. The person who denies their anger becomes passive. The one who denies their desire becomes numb. The one who denies their fear becomes arrogant. Each disowned emotion returns through the back door of the psyche, disguised as anxiety, projection, or moral judgment. There is, too, a deeply erotic element in this integration. The act of facing the shadow is a kind of inner lovemaking, a union of what has been separated. The ego, the conscious I, must open itself to the unconscious, the mysterious other within. This encounter, like the intimacy between lovers, demands vulnerability, surrender, and honesty. It is not about domination, but communion. When the conscious and unconscious finally meet, a new kind of energy arises, a fuller, more embodied aliveness. Jung often described this process as the conjunctio, the sacred union of opposites, the psychological equivalent of divine intercourse. To deny it is to remain spiritually celibate. Most people avoid this inner intimacy because it is uncomfortable. It threatens the polished persona we work so hard to maintain, the mask we wear to be loved and accepted. But masks do not love. They only perform. The shadow calls for authenticity, for the courage to admit, I am not only what I wish to be, I am also what I fear to be. And in that admission lies liberation. The energy once spent in repression becomes available for creation. You begin to see that the same instinct that once led you into conflict can, when integrated, lead you toward mastery and purpose. Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of one's fate. To love your fate is not simply to accept what happens in life, but to embrace what happens within you. Every shameful impulse, every hidden longing, every uncomfortable truth is part of that fate. To love it is to say yes to the whole of your being, to stop dividing yourself into light and shadow, sinner and saint. Jung called this the path of individuation, the movement toward becoming an undivided self. To integrate the shadow does not mean indulging it or acting on every impulse. It means owning it, understanding it, giving it a voice instead of a cage. It means transforming instinct into insight, compulsion into consciousness. When you no longer fear your darkness, you cease to project it onto others. You become more compassionate, more real, more grounded in your humanity. And so the task is not to be good, but to be whole. To stop pretending that light exists without darkness. When you integrate your shadow, you cease to be a fractured being chasing fragments of happiness. You stand instead as a unified self, radiant not because you are flawless, but because you have embraced your flaws as part of the divine pattern of your existence. The greatest light does not come from avoiding darkness. It comes from transforming it. When you dare to meet what you fear in yourself, you discover that beneath the shadow lies not evil, but immense, untapped life. Most people live as though meaning were something waiting to be handed to them, a truth to be discovered in a book, a belief system, a relationship, or a career. But meaning, like happiness, is not something that can be found ready-made. It must be created. And this creation, Nietzsche understood, is not an intellectual exercise. It is an act of will, of imagination, of soul. It demands that we become artists of our own existence. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he was not celebrating the death of divinity, but mourning the collapse of inherited meaning. He was announcing that the external structures that once gave life coherence, religion, tradition, collective myth, no longer hold authority for the modern mind. In their absence, we are left in a kind of spiritual vacuum. Many respond to this emptiness with despair or distraction. They seek new gods in ideology, consumerism, or social validation, but these are hollow substitutes. The more one searches for ready-made meaning, the further one drifts from genuine life. Jung recognized the same crisis in the soul of the 20th century and beyond. The loss of collective myth, he argued, left modern individuals unanchored. We are surrounded by technology and information, but starved of inner coherence. And yet he also saw in this crisis an extraordinary opportunity. When external sources of meaning fall away, the task of creation returns to the individual. We are forced to meet the divine not in the sky, but within. To create meaning is to participate consciously in the unfolding of your own destiny. It is to take responsibility for shaping your values rather than inheriting them. It is a deeply erotic and spiritual act. The psyche's yearning to unite with its own potential, to give birth to something uniquely alive. In psychological terms, this is the movement toward individuation. In Nietzsche's language, it is the will to power, the creative impulse that drives all life to transcend itself. The will to power is often misunderstood as the desire to dominate others, but Nietzsche never meant it that way. Power for him was the capacity to shape oneself, to turn chaos into form, instinct into art, raw life into meaning. It is the strength to say, this is who I am and this is how I will live, even when the world offers no map. Jung might have called this same impulse the drive toward wholeness, the psychic energy that compels us to integrate the fragments of our being into a coherent whole. Both men understood that the human spirit is not satisfied with comfort. It longs to create, to bring forth something that reflects the fullness of its inner truth. But creation demands confrontation. To create meaning, you must wrestle with chaos, the uncertainty of existence, the ambiguity of morality, the rawness of instinct. And this struggle is inherently sexual in nature, though not limited to physical desire. It is the energy of life seeking union with form, the masculine and feminine principles within us longing to meet and produce something new. Every act of genuine creation, whether it be art, love, or personal transformation, is a form of inner intercourse. It requires vulnerability, penetration of truth, and surrender to the unknown. To live this way is not easy. It is far simpler to consume meaning than to create it, to adopt someone else's beliefs, to hide behind collective morality, to let society tell you what to value. But every time you do, a part of your soul falls asleep. You become, as Nietzsche warned, one of the last men, comfortable, safe, and spiritually numb. Meaning cannot be mass-produced. It must be wrested from the raw material of your own experience. It must emerge from your encounters with joy and suffering, love and loss, creation and death. Only then does it have weight, authenticity, and depth. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To do so, you must stop waiting for someone else to define what your life should mean. Meaning is born in the dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious, in your willingness to listen to what stirs beneath your surface and to shape it into expression. The artist paints, the lover surrenders, the thinker questions, the healer feels. All are acts of creation, all are ways of saying, I will not let life be meaningless. When you begin to live as a creator of meaning, you stop seeing chaos as the enemy. You recognize it as the raw energy of existence, the primal material that demands form. And this is where Nietzsche's call to become who you are meets Jung's call to integration. To become who you are is to give structure to the inner chaos, to sculpt your being with consciousness. It is to transform instinct into wisdom, desire into direction, pain into power. In this alchemy, you become not a seeker of purpose, but the source of it. There is something profoundly liberating in realizing that meaning is not waiting for you somewhere out there. It is waiting for you to make it real. You do not need to be told what your life means. You need only the courage to live it fully, to shape it honestly, to risk it for something worthy of your soul. Meaning is not a gift bestowed by the gods. It is a fire that must be lit within the human heart. So if you find yourself lost or uncertain, stop asking what life means and start asking what meaning you are willing to create. Because when you begin to create rather than consume, you cease to drift, you begin to become. There comes a point in every person's journey when the constant search for happiness, meaning, and purpose begins to feel exhausting. You start to sense that the more you chase fulfillment, the further it drifts away. You notice that every high fades, every achievement eventually feels hollow, and every promise of joy dissolves into restlessness. It is then that a strange realization begins to dawn. The problem is not that life is withholding happiness from you. The problem is that you are seeking it as though it were something separate from yourself. Nietzsche understood this paradox deeply. He saw that the human being who spends their life seeking happiness remains forever enslaved to it. To seek the light as something external is to admit that you do not possess it. He urged us instead to become the light, to embody the very joy and vitality we keep pursuing. Become who you are, he said, and those words are not a call to self-improvement but to self-realization, to recognize that the light you seek is already burning within, waiting to be claimed. Jung would have agreed, but he would have expressed it differently. He would have said that when consciousness unites with the depths of the unconscious, when the self ceases to deny its own shadow, an inner radiance emerges, a wholeness that no external circumstance can grant or take away. The greatest illusion of modern life is that happiness is an object, a job, relationship, an achievement, a state of pleasure or peace. But when you make happiness conditional, you turn it into a mirage, always visible but never reachable. You begin to live as a beggar at the gates of your own being, asking life to deliver what only you can generate. To become the source of light rather than its seeker means reversing this orientation completely. It means turning your gaze inward, recognizing that the true function of consciousness is not to acquire experience but to illuminate it. When you begin to live as the source, a fundamental shift occurs. You no longer depend on others to make you feel complete. You stop expecting the world to entertain or validate you. You cease waiting for the perfect conditions to begin living. Instead, you radiate from within. You become a participant in life's unfolding, not its victim or spectator. Jung might call this the moment when the ego begins to align with the self, the deeper, timeless center of the psyche. This alignment produces a kind of inner luminosity, a quiet strength that does not depend on outer approval or stability. This radiance is not a naive bliss that ignores pain. It is born from the full acceptance of life's complexity. The person who becomes the source of light does not flee from darkness. They have made peace with it. They have integrated it. They understand that light without shadow is blinding, shallow, sterile. Real happiness is not the denial of suffering, but the transformation of it. It is the ability to remain open, to feel deeply, to love even when uncertain, to stand in chaos without losing the thread of being. There is also a deeply erotic dimension to this realization. To become the source of light is to become magnetically alive. It is to embody the energy of creation itself. When you are no longer searching for joy outside yourself, your presence begins to radiate it naturally. You become like the lover who no longer grasps or demands but gives, because they have discovered abundance within. This erotic energy is not merely sexual. It is existential. It is the vitality of being itself, the pulse of the universe expressing through you. To live from this place is to turn every moment into an act of creation, every encounter into a chance to awaken something deeper. But becoming the source of light demands something radical: responsibility. The moment you accept that happiness is not given but generated, you can no longer blame anyone or anything for your discontent. This is both terrifying and liberating. It means that your joy, your meaning, your peace are not subject to circumstance. They are reflections of your own relationship with consciousness. To live this way requires integrity, honesty, and discipline. It requires confronting your fears, your projections, your unhealed wounds, and transforming them into fuel for awareness. Nietzsche spoke of the individual who could affirm life in all its forms, the one who could say yes to existence without needing it to be different. That yes is not passive acceptance. It is active creation. It is the declaration that I will be the meaning I seek. I will be the light I chase. I will be the love I crave. Jung would call this the realization of the self, the moment when the psyche becomes an instrument of wholeness rather than fragmentation. When you reach this point, happiness ceases to be a pursuit and becomes an expression of your being, and what happens then is almost miraculous. The world begins to mirror your inner state. When you live as the source, life responds differently, not because it suddenly becomes easier, but because your perception has changed. You are no longer reacting to life's fluctuations. You are creating with them. You are in dialogue with the cosmos, not demanding, not begging, but participating. The same events that once caused despair now reveal depth. The same uncertainties that once paralyzed, you now awaken creativity. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of becoming a dancing star. It is the image of a soul that has learned to create joy even from chaos, to shine not because life is perfect, but because it is alive. So stop waiting for happiness to arrive. Stop seeking light in others, in possessions, in fleeting pleasures. The light you are searching for is not out there. It is the awareness glowing behind your eyes, the fire in your breath, the pulse within your chest. Turn toward it, cultivate it, live from it. Because the moment you become the source of light, you no longer need to chase it.